Hello, my name is Maya Grace in case you don't know. Today we're going to learn how to make all 3 sizes of the basic bow. This pattern is part of the bow pack pattern that is designed to supplement all of the upcoming Lolita patterns that are on the way. And in this pattern you will find the long bow and all of its 4 variations, the tiny little basic and big old bows and all of the variations of them, which is what we're going to be talking about today, the baby bat and batty bows, and the tea bag brooch and little heart decoration. All of these patterns are on one printable PDF file, and the video tutorials are all going to be split up into chunks that'll be hosted right here on the Maya Grace Sews YouTube channel. All of these bows, with the exception of the tiny bow, are constructed in the same way, and the only real difference is their size. So let's talk real quick about which ones you might want for what sorts of things. Tiny bow is for adding to wrist cuffs or like bodices, any little spot that could just use a tiny bit of volume and flourish. And obviously you can make this super cute bow ring out of it. I'm going to have a video specifically on this one and the tea bag coming out soon, so sit tight and wait for that. The little bow is bigger than the tiny bow, and it's big enough that it might overpower a wrist cuff. And it's going to be a lot less subtle than the tiny bow if you put it on a bodice or something. It's going to pop a little bit more, you're more likely to see it. It's large enough that it could go on a skirt, but it's still small enough that it might disappear depending on your design and what you're doing. The basic bow is like medium sized, and this one works great again on bodices or as a skirt pickup detail. It's also a good size to put on a headdress, use as a hair bow unless you want to go all out like I've done today. And then of course we have the big old bow. This is the biggest one. The original thought behind this bow was that it would be a really good piece for a bustle or to put on a skirt to like really add some volume, either to mimic waist ties and put it on the back if you have a structured gown that doesn't use waist ties. But really it's a cute design nod to those wonderful Victorian butt bows that had a revival on 1980s wedding dresses. I am a sucker for the butt bow personally. And then of course I've got one on my head right now. Each size of the basic bows has its own corresponding bow tail pattern piece that makes your bow look a little bit more like a classic stereotypical bow and not just like a subtle little bow. So this looks a little bit more like a gift bow or like a cartoon bow that you'd see in Tom and Jerry or something. So here is the basic bow without the bow tail and with the bow tail. There's that difference. And then the bow on my head is the big old bow, and it has the bow tail. I kind of like the spiky situation that's happening up here. It's a little bit like Lady Gaga kind of vibes. And here is the big old bow without the bow tails. But you can experiment with which of you like better for the application you're using it for and make the call for yourself of which you prefer. All of the seams for these bows are on the center back, going horizontally. This means that the edge of the bow is a little bit more rounded and soft, and it's kind of got like some fluff to it. But if you're using interfacing or a more like stiff fabric, it's gonna have like a crispness and a structure to it. But the intention for these bows is that they be made from the same fabric or a similar fabric to your main piece. So like a cotton sateen or a broadcloth or a garbadine or a poplin, what have you. But it will also work with a lightweight fabric to make a bow that's like acts a little bit more like a bubble, like a little wispy breath of a bow. A heavier velvet or corduroy could also be used hypothetically, but it's gonna be a lot harder to gather and a little bit chunkier. So I can't say that I would recommend it as a material to use because I think it's just gonna be frustrating. But with that said, let's jump right into the video and look at how we're gonna make these bows. Regardless of the size, all of the basic bows are cut out the same way. So you're going to cut out one of the bow bases per bow. These are all sewn in such a way that the seam goes in the back. And the front face of the bow is marked with dotted lines so that you know exactly where it is if you're trying to line up a pattern. Another piece that you are going to want for every bow is the bow ribbon. This is what holds the bow together and covers your stitch lines. A little trick for you: you don't want to cut out one individual pattern piece per bow. If you're going to make multiple bows, just make the strip longer by the pattern piece for every one that you need. So if you're making 2 bows like you see me planning to do here, you will move the pattern piece over once and cut out a long strip that is the length of 2 pattern pieces. Optionally, if you would like a very fancy bow with the pretty little tails, you will want to cut those out on the fold. You will cut one of this pattern piece per bow. The main part of the bow is sewn in 2 passes. For the first pass, you're going to fold it in half widthwise. You'll see that I'm marking with double pins a ending and a start point where I'm going to leave a gap. This gap will allow me to turn my bow inside out whenever I'm done closing up the ends. You will also see that I am removing pins as I sew so that I don't sew over them, and I am backstitching at the start and end of every stitch line, especially in the middle where my gap is. Next, go over to the ironing board and press your seams so that they're laying flat and open and so that the seam is in the center back. A quick easy test for this is to just fold your piece in half and make sure that the seam is on the fold. All that's left to do now is to close those open ends of your bow. Backstitching at both corners, because that's just what you do, baby! You don't have to worry about clipping any curves or corners, and you can go ahead and turn your bow right sides out. I would recommend using a chopstick or a bodkin to really get some crisp corners before taking it over to an ironing board and giving it a nice press. The little hole in the back is totally fine because once you scrunch the bow up, you won't be able to tell it's there anyway, so don't waste your time stitching it with a ladder stitch, just let it be! The optional bow tail is sewn basically the same way as the bow base, with a gap left in the middle so that it can be turned right side out and a back stitch at the beginning and end of every seam line. It also gets pressed with the seam line in the back center and the raw edges pressed flat. The only difference in construction is that it's sewn like a V on the open end instead of sewn flat. This makes it look more like a bow tail whenever it's turned right side out, and it's super cute! I marked these white chalk lines using the guide on the pattern piece, and to pivot my work, I've just put my needle in the down position, and then I lift my foot and I turn it. I also backstitched at the beginning and end of this stitch line. To make sure that it turns right side out and looks crisp, you'll want to clip that inner corner, careful not to cut your stitching lines. You'll also want to cut away the bulk of the seam allowance on this corner, but I did clip that floating edge the rest of the way, and I trimmed down the seam allowance even more so that it was just barely there. Now let's put the whole thing together. To start with, I'm going to thread my needle and put that aside for a second. Once I have my needle threaded, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold my bow in half. In my opinion, these bows look the best whenever there is a prominent fold in the center and then one fold on each side so that the ends are facing inwards toward the back. In other words, they look the best when there are 3 distinct peaks. After creating that gather with a running stitch, what I'm going to do is a securing stitch, and I like to wrap my thread around my whole bow and then do one more securing stitch before attaching the bow ribbon. I put my needle through on one end and I pull tightly, and then I fold the raw edge under and I whip stitch the fold down to the rest of the bow. Another way to do this is to do a very loose running stitch on the center fold of the bow. Make sure that the top and the bottom edge are folded toward the back of the bow because this will look more professional and finished. I do a securing stitch and wrap my thread all the way around once or twice before doing one more securing stitch. And next I'm going to put my needle right through that bow ribbon, pull it tightly, fold the raw edge of my ribbon under, and then I do a whip stitch to attach it to the rest of the bow. This makes it easy to slip a safety pin through the bow ribbon and attach it to anything, or alternatively slip a hair clip through the bow ribbon and use it like a hair bow. Now, to do the optional stacked bow with the little bow tail, what you're going to do is fold up your bow with those 3 little peaks and valleys like we talked about. And now I am grabbing the bow tail and folding it the same way, and I'm pinching at the center, and I'm putting my needle right through. Now you could do a running stitch, but I have personally found that this method gives me the best results. However, you are welcome to experiment and see what works best for you. Other than that, you're going to do the stitching the exact same way and attach your bow ribbon the exact same way. There's a lot of ways to add on to these bows with applique or maybe stacking different sizes of bow bases on each other, but for now, these are the basics for how to put together a nice little bow that you'll be happy with. And now you can make bows on bows on bows on bows. In the description box below is where you will find a link to my Ko-fi, where all of my free sewing patterns are hosted, such as the Cloud Queen bloomers and the headdress pattern, and there are others coming out soon. This channel and my free PDF sewing patterns are only made possible by viewers like you. And speaking of viewers like you, if you've ever followed one of my tutorials or just happen to be or know a really cool sewist, there is a Google form down below where you can submit your work and some information about the artist for a chance to be featured on the Keep Sewing On show that I do on my main channel. It is one of my favorite things that I do with my online platform. I'm still gonna keep doing it because I love doing it. But anyways, if you liked this video, be sure to give it a like so that more awesome people like you can see it. And I'll see y'all later. Bye, friends! Whip. I really hope it recorded that time because I don't want to do the outro again.